Have you ever wondered if there's some kind of hidden blueprint to reality? Well, today we're going to dive into a pretty fascinating symbolic system that claims to map out the very structure of creation itself, all the way from a single point of pure information to the flow of power in our own lives.
So let's kick things off with this one, foundational question. We always hear about the universe starting with a chaotic Big Bang. But what if it wasn't like that? What if instead, creation was this orderly unfolding of pure knowledge, kind of like a cosmic source code? That's really the core idea we're going to unpack here. So our journey starts at the very, very beginning. I want you to forget about space and time for just a second. We're going to look at how this system sees everything we know emerging from a single, dimensionless dot of pure potential. Okay, so this origin point, it's made of something called ilm. Now, the best way to think about ilm is as pure potential. It's like the raw data of reality before it takes any kind of shape or form. This unmanifested knowledge is what underpins everything that exists. And that leads us right to our first symbol. It's just a dot. Super simple, right? But this dot represents that 0 point of pure ilm. The source material tells us that this is the first and most fundamental state of being, the absolute origin of everything. Now, this is where it gets really interesting, how this pure information starts to take shape. First, the dot basically projects itself, and in doing so, it creates a line. And with a line, you suddenly have the concept of direction. Then it creates a second point, and bam, you get a triangle. And this triangle is described as the actual blueprint for humanity's software image. It's like watching a geometric cascade of creation unfold right before your eyes. Okay, so that's the big cosmic picture. But how does this abstract blueprint actually, turn into something we experience directly? We're now shifting from that cosmic scale to its most intimate application, the engine of human consciousness. Well, in this system, the word for consciousness is bion. And bion isn't just one thing. It's an integration of all those principles we just saw. The dot, the line, the triangle, they all come together to form our coherent, aware experience of the world. This bion is the manifestation of that initial blueprint. So it all boils down to this really simple but pretty profound equation. The original point of pure information, ilm, combines with its own geometric projections to create what we call consciousness, or bayan. It's kind of like the software finally running on the hardware of creation. Now, once we have this idea of consciousness, things get even more interesting. Because inside that consciousness, this model says there's a fundamental split, a duality that shapes our entire inner world. And it's described metaphorically as two vast oceans. And this is visualized beautifully using the Arabic letter nun, which itself is shaped like a vessel or a little bowl. Each of these nun symbols represents one of these two inner oceans existing side by side inside every single one of us. And what's cool is that these two oceans have totally different vibes, almost like the modern idea of right brain and left brain functions. The right ocean, that's the realm of intuition, memory, reflection. It's about looking inward, looking back. The left ocean, on the other hand, is the domain of the intellect, of planning, of projecting yourself outward into the future. Do you feel that split within yourself? All right, so if we're all walking around with this internal division, what's the solution? How do we find some balance? Well, the system provides an answer, a unifying principle that allows these two oceans to meet without, chaotically crashing into each other. That meeting point has a name, the barzakh. And it's such a fascinating concept. It's not a wall, but more like a permeable barrier, a space between where the two sides can interact and find harmony without losing what makes them different. This barzakh is the absolute key to inner balance. And this idea has deep roots. Just listen to this quote. It frames the barzakh not just as some nice idea, but as a fundamental law of our inner nature, a boundary that allows for a meeting without a messy transgression, making sure there's this delicate, necessary balance. And get this isn't just theoretical. It's something you can actually feel. You can experience this concept right now by just raising your hands together like you're holding water in a bowl. Each hand is one of the oceans, one of the nun vessels. And that space right between your palms, that's the barzakh. That's where the flow of ilm is received. You're not going to believe this, but there's even a kind of symbolic math to it. In this system, each nun, or each hand, has a numerical value of 5. So when you bring two hands together, that's 5 plus 5, which is 10. And in this type of numerology, you reduce multi-digit numbers down, so 1 plus 0 equals 1. It's this beautiful symbol of returning to the unity of that single dot we started with.
Okay, so we've looked inward. Now let's take that exact same principle of flow and balance and see what happens when we apply it to the outside world, to the systems of command and information transfer that govern all of us. According to the source, there's a really specific, almost sacred cycle for how authority or the word is supposed to be passed on. It starts with the first person. When they transfer that authority to the second person, that person actually becomes the new first person. But, and this is the absolute crucial step, the original first person must then submit to the new one to keep the whole cycle healthy.
And the stakes here are incredibly high. On one hand, you have success. When the cycle is honored and that submission happens, the chain of command is crystal clear and the whole system just works. But if the original first person refuses to submit, you suddenly have two competing authorities, two first persons. And the result? System corruption. And, eventually, the collapse of the entire structure.
So, all of this, from that single dot to the collapse of entire systems, it brings us to one final, really personal question. If this whole model is about the flow of information, of ilm, it forces us to ask, in your own life, in your work, in your family, what role are you playing in that flow? Are you a vessel, receiving information? A messenger, passing it on? Or are you a source? The answer might just change how you see everything.